You went from cyberpunk to Marxism. I'm not sure. To listen and to look and to understand where's life going. I normally say the only true luxury in architecture is ceiling height. We hope to open it for weekends. You're all invited.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Bana. I'm host of today's HubTalks conversation with Bjarke Ingels, founder and architect at the Bjarke Ingels Group, who, as some of you know, have headquarters right over here. You can literally look outside. Bjarke, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
I hope the trip didn't take too long.
No, actually, I was told it took 5 minutes. It was more like 5 seconds.
The title of today's conversation is Formgiving, which is the title of an exhibition that you had at the Danish Architecture Center, but also a 2020 book that you published with Taschen during the pandemic. You use formgiving quite a lot, arguing that architects might not have the power of prediction, but they do have the power of proposition. Can you give the audience a quick overview of what formgiving means?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think I do love actually etymology and sometimes digging a little bit into to words, because we tend to just listen to words and recognize them as names of something we already know what is. But when you dig into it, the original word for design is formgivning, which literally means form giving. And if you listen to it, it's because to design something, whether it is a space or an object or a building or a city, you are giving form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, you are giving form to the future, because designing a building or a space, you are actually giving form to the world, a small part of the world, but nonetheless the world that you would like to find yourself living in the future. And I think when you listen to that, you suddenly understand that design is not just about aesthetics or style or fashion. It's really about the fundamental questions of what kind of a world would we like to live in. And it's worth repeating that to yourself and to your team and to the people you collaborate with, that each time we are called upon intervening, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in this particular part of the world to make this part of the world more like our dream world.
Interesting. In the book, you also reference a William Gibson quote arguing that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Who do you think is getting the biggest piece of the pie and who's getting the smallest at the moment?
I'm wondering, you went from cyberpunk to Marxism. I'm not sure, at least maybe we start with William Gibson. The amazing thing is William Gibson is sort of the grandfather, along with Bruce Sterling, of cyberpunk. And cyberpunk is a form of science fiction, whereas a lot of science fiction at the time was much more like far future space opera, hard to really relate to our everyday. And, some would say Blade Runner is an example of cyberpunk. It was almost like projecting a future by extrapolating the present. And William Gibson's beautiful quote that the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. What he means, and maybe we can refer that to distribution of wealth, but I think what he meant was that what you'll find in the future, in a way also, let's say we are 8 billion people on Earth. In 2050, we're probably going to be 10. That means that 80% of the city is already here. That means that future Copenhagen is probably going to look a lot like the Copenhagen we all know. But then there might, of course, be some little modifications. And then it also means that what will really define our future probably already exists in a lab somewhere or in a server room somewhere. There's maybe a new branch of AI, or AI in its current open form. Large language models already existed as kind of a laboratory experiment. Or even if you go and visit our architecture company, you can see on our desks and in our model workshop and on our computer screens images and drawings of what Bhutan is going to be like 5 to 10 years from now. So in some way, the reminder that I think that quote gives us is that whenever we get called upon designing something, life is always evolving. And as life evolves, then our behavior changes, but we still inhabit the same buildings that were built. So each time we are called to design a new building for an activity, as designers, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to listen and to look and to understand where's life going, how is it evolving, and then to use that to draw the contours. So rather than forcing life into the straitjacket of our existing building city spaces, to really understand where's life going and use that as an opportunity to imagine new kinds of spaces that actually fit better with the way life is now.
Absolutely. The series HubTalks is focused on the infinite potential of the indoors. I'd be curious to hear more about Formgiving and its implications on interiors and building, how they affect our quality of life, not necessarily the urban context or the form or anything else, but just quality of life. How do you think you can shape buildings for humans to thrive in the future?
I think it's in some way, you can also say it's important for architecture to know when to stop. You know, Arne Jacobsen was famously making rules of what kind of color the doors could be, and like sort of a desire to control everything. And I do think that the architecture that we create is the canvas for people to decorate it with their personality, with their lifestyle. So in that sense, I think when we draw workspaces or spaces for living, we should try to maximize opportunity almost in an almost quantifiable way. Like I normally say, the only true luxury in architecture is ceiling height. Because it's hard to argue for it, because 2 meters and 55 centimeters is what you need by code. And anything beyond that is like, yeah, but do we really have to? But then when you come into historical structures or in workspace across the street, we try to create as much breathing room as possible. So when you're walking on the ground floor, you can actually look sort of diagonally all the way up to the 7th floor with this kind of series of mixture of double height, triple height, quadruple height spaces. So I think that's one thing. And then I think, of course, daylight, fresh air, a good acoustic. You'll notice that when you go into our office, even though it seems like all the surfaces are hard, like glass, concrete, wood, etc., like it actually has a very sort of good reverberation, like you actually do here as well. So these kind of invisible things that ends up providing the kind of living conditions, and then within that freedom, the company or the family should have the greatest possible opportunity to be them and to express that through their own means.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe the interior experience here at the offices? I know you described daylight and everything, but what's the arrival experience like up until the exit experience? How do you think it affects employees' everyday life?
No, yeah, but I think a major part of architecture is also this idea of invitation. A city and a building can be a very overcoded environment. Like I like to say that, for like, everybody loves being in nature for a lot of reasons. But one of them could also be that you don't have rules, whereas, you know, in a park, you're not supposed to walk on the grass. You're supposed to sit on the bench. So like there's this whole set of you stop at the crosswalk. If you fool around, you're jaywalking. Whereas in nature, you can climb a rock if you have the skills to climb it. Otherwise, you should be careful. And, you know, like you can climb a tree. And again, you should be careful. But this idea that there is invitation. And I think what we try to do with our work environment is that each floor is connected to the outside. Instead of having a big stair in the middle of the building, every floor you can actually walk out to a terrace, and that terrace is connected to the terrace above and the terrace below. So you actually have a man-made mountain path that goes all the way up to the roof park. And actually today we have an exhibition on the ground floor, and then we had an exhibition on the rooftop. But because we're also working, we closed the building inside, so people are actually invited to walk on the outside of the building all the way up. And I think that's a quite unusual experience. But this idea that every time you make a building, that building not only has to take care of itself and its own, it also should be generous towards the city, because it could be an interactive citizen, right? So even our ground floor, we hope to in the fall to open our canteen as a restaurant. We're doing it with a Fiskebaren, so it's called Big Fisk. We hope to open it for weekends. You're all invited. And where it's open, of course, you can look in, and eventually maybe you can go in and have a meal. But where it's closed, the walls are actually shaped to be a bench. So you're invited to sit on the building, you're invited to climb the building. So that idea of invitation, there's also a sociological study that says, how do you get people to take the stair instead of the elevator? It's very easy. If they can see the stair, they're more likely to take it instead of going into a room and up an elevator, a stair shaft. And if they can see where they're going, they're more likely to go there by stair. So in that sense, we also really try to make sure that each floor is always open visually and physically to the floor above and the floor below. And it worked so well, I would say that after we had been in the building for 9 months, I came with my newborn son in a baby stroller. And that was the first time I took the elevator, simply because you have the invitation to do it. So there's a major element in architecture about invitation.
Yeah, I think the staircase was a highlight for me. I just popped in about an hour ago, and I was just very impressed by how black it is and how it contrasts against the space. Beautiful. How do you think the building will age? I mean, it just opened last year, right? 2024.
Yeah, the building opened maybe 2 years ago, and we opened the park last year.
Okay. How do you think it would age within 10 years and within 50?
With grace and beauty and patina. No, but one thing we've done with all the materials, and maybe there's a whole second half of this talk where we could talk about materialism, which is another interest of mine these days. But because we are the clients and the architects and the users, we could allow ourselves to be dogmatic in a way. So we actually don't have the typical drywall and paint that you would have in a typical building. So the entire building is what it is because it does what it does. For instance, like all the buildings, when you look across the basin to Aarhusgadekvarteret, all the buildings you see, I believe without exception, are concrete buildings. But they look like brick buildings or metal buildings. And on the inside, they look like drywall with paint. But they are all concrete buildings because concrete has a lot of attributes that are good for building buildings. But then we cover it with something else. We felt it could be interesting to actually not cover it. And it has a lot of advantages also. One that I think is interesting is when concrete cures, it hardens by capturing CO2 from the air. So over the lifetime of the building, it can recarbonize, it's called, between 5 and in extreme cases 20% of the CO2 that was emitted in the making of the concrete. But it only does it if you don't cover it. So an exposed concrete building is more sustainable than one that is covered. A second thing about the concrete that I think is funny is we looked at different materials. We just finished the most environmentally friendly factory in the world in Norway, and it's all made out of locally sourced Norwegian timber. And we thought it could be beautiful to try to make a building out of wood for ourselves. But of course, we're surrounded by salt water on 3 sides, so we would have to coat it with some kind of toxic paint or whatever and redo it on the outside. And then on the inside, you can only have 25% timber surface on the walls. And we have that already on the north wall where we have all our meeting rooms. So we would have to cover all the other timber. So slowly it became clear. And then we would have to sprinkle the building. We couldn't make it naturally ventilated. And all these things just meant that suddenly, to our surprise, the timber building in this case would not be the most sustainable choice. And then we found that we worked with Portland Cement to test a new product where they replace a third of the cement in the concrete with clay, which has the effect that it lowers the carbon footprint of the cement with a third, but it also makes the concrete warm. So if you go inside the building, you can see we have curtains, and we got like all the gray and beige samples from Kvadrat that we could get because we wanted to somehow match the concrete with the curtains. And to our surprise, the curtains that match the concrete are the beige ones because the concrete is a lot warmer because of the clay content. So in some way, it was a long answer to your question about how the building with patina, but because the building, you know, when paint gets old, it starts peeling and it starts paling and it starts getting scratched. So day one, the paint looks beautiful. And then it just deteriorates. Whereas with real materials, of course, the wood will have imperfections. It kind of darkens, it grays, it even withers a little bit. But because of the genuine character of the material, the authenticity of the material, it actually starts becoming beautiful, even though you can see that's an old piece of wood. Yeah. You find it attractive. And I think all materials, stone, wood, concrete, have that attribute, whereas a coat of paint really looks good the first day, and then it's just
downhill from
straight
there.
downhill.
Absolutely. No, it's interesting you speak about materials. I know you've been guest editor at Domus magazine, which basically have a system where they change editors each year, and you're focusing each issue on a different material. Your June issue is focused entirely on wood.
Yeah, exactly.
What other upcoming materials will you be exploring?
So the 7th will be plastic and fabric. It's a double issue, July and August. And then we've sort of run through the first 7 more classic materials. Then comes biomaterial, or essentially living materials, including plants, mycelium, fungi. Then comes recycled materials to source our materials from the existing building environment. I mean, of course, if 80% of the total population of Earth is already here, we are 8 billion out of 10. Most of the buildings of the future have already been built. So one of the great frontiers of the future is really reimagining and reinventing what we do with our existing buildings. And of course, also sourcing our material supply from the buildings that can't be reused, but has to be taken down and rebuilt. So that's a whole chapter on that. And then the last one is immaterial. So we needed the antithesis, of course, AI, robotics, but also sound, light, airflow, temperature. there's all these things that are not necessarily rooted in a material. I would even say ornament, maybe decoration.
For sure.
And I think that the whole idea about choosing materialism as a term is that materialism has become almost exclusively associated with the negative idea of empty consumerism. But we thought, what if materialism could also be a way of looking at the world and understanding that human society has been shaped by the materials we know how to harvest and source and manipulate in order to create the world we want to live in. So in a way, starting with the material. So on the ground floor across the street, this is just like a long advertising to get people to cross the street afterwards. But we have 7 different collaborations with various manufacturers. I think a very interesting one is we're working with Nero Sicilia, which is this Italian company where we take lumps of lava and then we melt it so that we use the tectonics of lava to become an almost industrial process of making outdoor furniture, because once it cools again, it of course becomes a sort of basalt, a stone. 4 years ago, I think I went to the volcanic eruption in Iceland in the first week. And, we went there at night, we started hiking. It was kind of 0 degrees, like freezing. And then after like 2-3 hours of hike, we came to this valley where there was like a planet-sized bonfire, right, of just like this 1200 degree warm lava flowing like a soft river. And of course, because it was freezing, it instantly crusted, and you could actually walk up to it and poke it with a ski pole. And then once in a while, the pressure from the hot magma underneath would sort of create these kind of little bubbles. So when you go over and see the samples we're doing with Neo Sicilia, you have this kind of strange geological reminder that stone is actually liquid magma that is just so cold that you see it as a solid. Just like water we see as a liquid, but you could also see it as a stone, a solid, which is ice, that is just not warm enough to be a liquid. So it suddenly like fucks with your sort of preconceptions, because of course we tend to see everything in the kind of spectrum of temperature that is comfortable to a human. But I've always thought about this. We believe that life is associated with liquid, because the liquid is somehow like water, because the liquidity of water makes it possible for our cells to live inside the water and also for us to be mobile instead of solid. But what if on another planet there was a whole sort of biosphere of beings that instead of water was relying on lava as their body fluids? I think that could be pretty trippy. In any case, all that and more you can see in our collaboration with Nero Sicilia.
Fascinating. I also didn't realize that stone was as malleable as it is. You can shape it. Fascinating. Another thing I just saw at the show was a reference to your, I think it was a reference to your upcoming airport in Bhutan. So you have the woodwork and you have 2 craftsmen working live right now on the wood.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's been a little bit of a journey in my evolution as an architect. I thought about it the other day, and I think it started 4 years ago. I bought a summer house that was made in 1918 by Swedish craftsmen that had migrated to Denmark because they didn't have work in Sweden. They built a summer house in 1918, then they built another one in 1919, and then they all migrated to America to find happiness in the new world. But because I took over this house and started restoring it, it's full of all these traditional Swedish colors like phthalo red, which is a byproduct of copper, phthalo yellow, which is a byproduct of ochre, like iron ore. There was something interesting about being a restoration architect, and also because the original workers had decorated with these kind of Swedish flower drawings, and I sort of restored all that and thought maybe it's not so bad, this whole ornament thing. Then I meet the king of Bhutan 2 years ago, and I've been to Bhutan several times, about 5-6 times the last 2 years. And Bhutan is an incredibly beautiful country. It's sandwiched between China and India in the Himalayas. It's the most sustainable country in the world, sequesters twice as much carbon as they emit. It's covered by 82% forests. And then their culture is entirely intact, maybe because of their isolation, but also because of a decisive decision to preserve their heritage. Like, so they have 8 large schools where they educate wood carvers, artists, stonemasons, sculptors of various kinds. And in the beginning, we were sort of, okay, we're building this entire city out of wood. We're making the airport entirely out of mass timber. But of course, we kept it still in a relatively Scandinavian sensibility. And then on my 5th trip there, it started dawning on me I think I had been exposed long enough that it started penetrating that, of course, we would have to embrace the craft and the ornamentation. So we started doing some prototypes, and we got a 3-month work visa for 2 woodcarvers that have spent almost 3 months now. They leave soon, sadly, doing different tests for the superstructure of this airport. So it's going to have this ancient, futuristic feeling. That's a kind of space frame of mass timber. So in a way, the material of the future, because in many ways, engineered timber is one of the great ways to build low carbon construction. And we've gotten so good at it that we can make very large, complex structures. We're doing Zurich's new airport entirely out of timber. But then at the same time, we are applying the ornaments, the decoration, the carved dragons, hummingbirds, dolphins, whatever, like they carve into these into the structure, so that when you arrive in the airport, hopefully in 2029, it should open its doors to visitors. You not only land in a very modern airport, but you're also surrounded with this kind of ancient Bhutanese storytelling of carving into the bones of the building the story of the nation and the city.
Definitely exciting. I feel like most of the airports we have around the world have been built for a while, and most are extensions or new terminals. There are a few opportunities right now to build completely new airports. And so it's exciting to see that one in Bhutan and Zurich. Definitely exciting. I did want to end this on a cosmic note, just for fun. You often talk about the moon and Mars. What conditions do you think would allow humans to not only survive but also thrive on the moon and Mars?
It's a strangely relevant question. I mean, I think it's not unlikely that in 2 years the first landing, we've been to the Mars before, obviously, but the first SpaceX landing on Mars with Starship, and if that's successful, then it is not unlikely that already 2 years later the first return vehicle could be sent. The idea is to fly to Mars with a return vehicle. So you send an unmanned rocket to Mars. It lands on Mars. Mars is interesting that it's so similar that it's an incredible cosmic coincidence that our nearest neighbor is so similar to Earth. Just an example, Moon, which is of course only 2 days away traveling, has a day cycle, a circadian cycle of 1 month, 28 days. So a night is 2 weeks long and a day is 2 weeks long. So for humans, that's going to be frustrating, right? It's night again. But on Mars, the day is 24 hours and 38 minutes, which even seems like a bonus that you get 38 minutes longer to sleep in the morning, right? So we are fully accustomed to that. That also means that all animals, ourselves included, and also plants, are somehow adjusted to that circadian cycle. Then Mars has the same seasonal tilt as Earth, similar. So they have 4 seasons. A Martian year is almost twice as long as an Earth year. And on equator on Mars, on midsummer, the temperatures are like around 20 degrees Celsius, which is like a Danish summer day. Of course, it gets colder at night. It gets quite cold on Mars. No, and then, of course, CO2-rich atmosphere, which means that's what plants breathe. So you could imagine some lichen or other, maybe some... what does a reindeer eat? Lichen, no? Or...
Wrong person to ask.
Lav på engelsk? Anyone? Any case. So there's a whole family of Arctic plants that could probably, with a little bit of help, survive on Mars, which means that they could start enriching the atmosphere with oxygen. And then finally, humans have turned out to be very good at global warming. But that's exactly what Mars needs for us to thrive. So the idea of terraforming, making Mars inhabitable in a time span of maybe 200 years is not entirely unlikely. And of course, 200 years sounds like a long time. It took 1,000 years to make Copenhagen, and we still did it, right? And then I think like maybe another aspect, because I often get the question, why should we even think about visiting other planets like the Moon and Mars? And I think part of it is that by definition we are explorers. And if we agree that mankind evolved in East Africa, I think according to the Genographic Project, we can trace the migration of human DNA from East Africa. I think there's a 60,000-year-old and a 200,000-year-old atom that you can trace back to. And then you can see how, by just visiting indigenous tribes all over the Earth, you can see how mankind migrated all over planet Earth. And you can say, like, yeah, but we can't survive on Mars without a lot of technology. Well, good luck surviving the winter in Copenhagen without a house or a duvet and some warm shoes, a little bit of hygge. So I think we wouldn't be able to survive in Scandinavia without a lot of technology that we've already invented, clothing, architecture, heating, etc. We just need to make a little bit more technology, and then we can actually potentially thrive on Mars. That said, I would still say that it's still on my bucket list to go to Antarctica, because I think the best test of how it's going to be to live on Mars for the many first decades is like going to McMurdo on Antarctica. Because on Antarctica, you have incredibly cold winters, obviously, and you have a population, I think it's a few thousand maybe, that live in McMurdo, but they don't live there all their lives. They live there for a while, and then they go back. And I think it probably takes longer to travel from Copenhagen to McMurdo than it takes to fly to the moon, because it's 48 hours to get to the moon. I think McMurdo is a bigger commitment. And I also like this idea that we have to remember it's not going to be a one-way ticket, because when Magellan went to South America, it took 3 months to sail there. And when people started migrating to the Americas, it was a risky journey, and in the beginning it took many months. We can get to Mars in 3 months. And then you have to commit to staying there for, because the next window of return is either immediately when you arrive, or it'll be 2 years later. So in that sense, I don't think it's going to be very different from the conditions that people said yes to when they decided to explore the Americas.
Yeah, I'm excited to see upcoming research and development. I guess we have about 10-ish minutes if we want to open for questions. If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and raise your voice. Yeah.
I'm curious about AI and how we think about the future about architecture and how we live as humans and the acceleration that we're currently experiencing, how that impacts your.
Exactly the last issue of Materialism, we want to try to speak with some of the experts on that field. I spent some time with the head of AI for Microsoft, and he had an interesting point of view where he said human language has roughly 30,000 different words. When you count everything and even words that don't exist in all languages and stuff like that, but it's like roughly 30,000 words. And that is sort of the bandwidth through which we can funnel and exchange meaning and insight and sensibility. And you have to remember that language is a bit like Lego bricks. I think there's 2,500 Lego bricks. So like you have more Lego bricks in language. But it's important to say that language is not the same as the meaning. It's just the best way, as close as we can get to transmitting the meaning, but it isn't the meaning, it's a translation. Just like if you build a Lego model of a mammalian ball, it's not going to be a mammalian ball, it's going to be the best approximation capturing of a mammalian ball, and it might come very close, but it's still the Lego version of it, right? And he was saying what's happening right now with AI is that as the AI is increasingly becoming capable, like for instance, like some of the new, very advanced approximating artificial general intelligence, they're beginning to be able to deploy little collaborators to almost like start teams solving problems in aggregate, coordinating, orchestrating, just like human teams would. And for that, they start inventing new words. They're called large language models, right? They're experts in language. So they start making new words. And you can say the way that they illustrate meaning is in a multi-dimensional space, that you have a kind of concentration of coordinates in this multi-dimensional space. And where you have those concentrations, those nodes, they become essentially words or like concentrations of meaning, but they may not have already been given a human word. So they're constantly fabricating new words that identify concepts that haven't been created or identified by humans yet. So we're almost approaching where their vocabulary, their world of concepts becomes so vast that for them to translate it back to connect to humanity becomes a whole journey. If you remember the movie Her, which I think one of the best films ever made, definitely on my top 5. There's this moment where Joaquin Phoenix realizes that Scarlett Johansson, is having like thousands of simultaneous conversations at the same time, and she's also in love with hundreds of people, and she tries to describe why she has to leave him. She says, "You are like my favorite book, but the space between each word is expanding into an infinite space." So somehow, like she starts existing on a realm that is hard to relate to humanity. I think it reminded me of what the head of AI of Microsoft was explaining. So I think we're definitely moving into completely uncharted territory. If we have to bring it back to design, we're very interested in AI, and we're trying to force ourselves to use it, even though it's always easier just to do it yourself. To try to say, could this task be actually lifted by AI in whatever form? And the more you use this tool, the better you get at using it, see the opportunity in it. And I think you can say, like, I started architecture school because I was good at drawing. And then at architecture school, this is 25 years ago, I had to then, or like maybe more. Yeah, it's more like 32 years ago. I had to draw with a ruler, and I could make multi-point perspectives, axonometrics, etc. So I lost some of the feeling I had with my watercolors and my crayons, and my brushes. But I gained a new kind of control that I could construct very complex drawings. Then I had to draw with a mouse, and I lost the tactility of the physical drawing. But I could, map different materials, make daylight settings. I could move around in 3 dimensions. So I lost some control, but I gained a new world of opportunity. And then I started working with people. And I would say now I am designing with people. Of course, sometimes I communicate with a sketch or even with cutting a piece of foam or whatever. But mostly what I'm doing is that I'm engaging with naturally intelligent, highly educated fellow designers. And through what you could call prompting, I give certain prompts, certain suggestions. I make certain observations. I say, try to look at this, try to look at this, and then I respond to what comes back. And through that prompting back and forth between various kinds of human intelligence and various kinds of expertise, engineers, sociologists, clients, consultants, city architects, whatever, a project evolves. And I think the true potential is that someone who graduated, and it took me 25 years to have a team of 700 people. And I love that creative power of having assembled this amazing team. But someone who graduates from architecture school today, who has a lot of will and a lot of intent, could actually have the force of 700 at his or her fingertips simply by being very good at working with artificial intelligence instead of natural intelligence. So it's an incredible frontier, and we can't even understand how fast it's happening and how much it's going to change everything.
Yeah, things have been pretty exponential. I think we can take one more question, a small question. Yes.
I hear the biggest problem the king's facing right now is young people leaving the country as that really bad. What is the biggest problem that's causing this? And how does your project and your tie back to craftsmanship try to solve this problem?
First of all, it is true that there's 200,000 Bhutanese living in Australia, and there's 800,000 Bhutanese in Bhutan. So they've seen what you could call a brain drain, that the young people are essentially going to Australia and Canada primarily in pursuit of prosperity, economic opportunity. So what the king and the government is trying to do is, by creating Gelephu Mindfulness City on the border to India, to create a special administrative region of 2,500 square kilometers that is somehow anchored in the values of Bhutan, but that is more open for international investment, to try to create an environment that could be so dynamic to attract foreign investment, to be able to retain local talent, that they might seek that economic opportunity in Gelephu Mindfulness City instead of in Perth. So, of course, to do this, the king has, of course, looked at the miracle that is Singapore. Singapore is a tiny country entirely without resources, but who found a smart way to leverage their position. You could say Hong Kong is a similar story. Because of a special legislative, and in this case, special amount of freedom, suddenly Hong Kong was very attractive as a gateway to China. And I think Bhutan could really function as a gateway to India and or China, but especially I would say India, but with the advantage of having, it's going to be a lot easier to get access to the Prime Minister of Bhutan than it is to get access to Modi. They have little to no corruption, unlike India. So there could be a lot of benefits to have a free trade zone with India, but anchored in Bhutan. So that's sort of outside the realm of architecture, of course. What we're trying to do and what we're trying to solve for is, how can you create this new city without displacing the local culture and heritage that makes Bhutan so special, but actually enhancing and nourishing and enhancing it. So in a way, we ended up designing a city that is shaped by the 34 rivers that flow through the tropical plains at the base of the Himalayas, where we're using locally available materials, where we're sort of trying to deploy local craft, so that you end up with an urban environment that is anchored. Bhutan famously measures their success as a nation in gross national happiness. So anchored in the 9 parameters based upon which they measure gross national happiness, to actually use that as the foundational pillars of the city. So essentially, we're trying to sort of allow the energy and economy of the rest of the world to enter in a safe sandbox without displacing all the beauty and greatness of Bhutan that I think we could all also learn a lot from.
Alrighty. Thank you for the question. Well, that's all the time we have. Bjarke, thank you so much for taking time to be here today. I really enjoyed this conversation. And thank you to the audience for coming. Hope you enjoy the rest of 3 days of design. Thank you.